Restaurant Unstoppable, inspire, empower, and transform the industry. With excitement, allow me to introduce to you today's guest, emeritus of faculty. Emeritus, is that the right term? Emeritus faculty?
This is the right one. It sounds crazy.
Emeritus faculty of the Hotel School of Cornell University, Stephani Robson. Stephani, are you feeling unstoppable today?
I think my students would say I'm always unstoppable, and they aren't always grateful for that. But yes, feeling unstoppable.
Yes, I cannot wait to get into today's conversation. We're going to be talking about business planning, specifically how to engage or how to write a business plan for your audience is what we're going to be getting into specifically. And this is part one of the three-part workshop where we're going to be going through business planning. First, how to write your business plan for your specific audience. Then we're going to be covering pro formas a week from today, and 2 weeks from today, we're going to be covering capital budget. And the reason why Stephani is here is because originally I was collaborating with restaurantowner.com to basically lead today's conversation. And we're going to use their business plan template that you all have access to. If you're in Restaurant Unstoppable Network, you get 6 months free access to restaurantowner.com. So just make sure you're taking advantage of that. We were going to cover that template and go through it. And then Jim and Joe were just like, well, why don't we just connect you with our resource where we went to develop this business plan, and that is you, Stephani. So we went straight to the source. I'm super excited to unpackage business planning with you, but let's get that motivational, inspirational ball rolling with a success quote or mantra. What do you got for us?
The one that I like to use is know who you're talking to and what they care about.
Know who you're talking to and what they care about.
Yeah, know who you're talking to and what they care about. This isn't just for business planning, but this is for anything you do, because every time we are engaging with a guest or a prospective investor or a prospective business partner, you have to get inside their head so that you can make your message work for them. So I always tell my students, who's your guest? What do they care about? And what we're going to talk about today is, who's reading your business plan and what do they care about, so that you can actually make the biggest impact with what you're doing.
So it's funny that you say this quote, because it really reminds me of one of the 7 habits of highly effective people. And we were talking about that book this morning in our morning meeting. And one of those habits is first seek to understand, then seek to be understood. Mm-hmm. And that's what I think of when you say, know who you're talking to, understand them, understand. And we were actually talking about psychology before we hit record too. And I think that really plays into, but I don't want to get too far off track.
Oh, no. We can go all kinds of ways. Everything you do is psychology though, right?
Yeah.
And in our business, right? Hospitality, restaurants, the psychology is even more important, because nobody has to go to a restaurant, right? This is a choice. And so if you understand what's driving people, no matter what you're doing, you'll be more successful. So that's kind of my overarching mantra.
So I gave the listeners a little bit of an idea of who we're talking to, but before we dive into today's subject, do you want to just maybe paint the picture a little bit better as far as who you are and how you got to where you are today?
Sure. I sort of backed into all of this. I actually started as a cook. I worked in what was a summer camp. It was a manor house in Wales, and it was rented out to a summer camp. So I worked cooking food for 15 to 18-year-olds in Wales, in Britain. And that was great. I loved it. Yeah, it was awesome. And I thought, I really enjoy this. I think I want to go to school for it. So I ended up doing a bachelor's degree in hospitality management and really liked it, but didn't necessarily want to do operations. So I went into design. I designed commercial kitchens. And so talked stainless steel and equipment specs and all that good stuff. And while I was doing that, I started to learn about how the design affected people, but the guests and the people working in the back of house. And I thought, this is really cool. And to make a long story short, I ended up going back to school and getting more degrees and blah, 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 but ended up teaching it, which has been really rewarding. And so what I focus on is, how can you create an environment that gives people the effect that you want to have on them? And that has been really, really interesting, because restaurants haven't been studied very much. I think I'm one of the only people who does it.
We're like there's so much room for growth in this vertical, because we are notorious for being behind times. So not only are we in this period of time where growth and change is happening faster than ever before, but the restaurant industry is also like 5 years behind. So we have to catch up to what we're already behind. And then once we get caught up, I feel like there's just going to be endless like possibility for just the world's gonna be changing so fast and then the real near future.
I think you're right. And the technology piece, which is so important to how we run, is also really important to understand what effect it's going to have on your guests and your employees. Before we start recording, and you have to excuse me, my lawn guy is here doing my lawn. So you might hear that in the background.
We can hear you louder. It's fine.
Oh, that's good. That's all that matters. But I think the technology is going to affect people's reception of what their experience is going to be like. And we have to be very careful in how we apply it. And again, now we're going away from business planning, but it all does come together, because I think the business plan, a lot of people see it as this kind of thing I'm going to do at some point. And I'm going to pick on you, Eric, just a little bit, because when we were talking before the session, you mentioned that you have this business idea and you're working on the vision for that business idea and you're doing a little testing. And when we first started talking this morning, Eric was wearing an apron and he had like flour all over it. And because he was recipe testing, which is awesome. And that's one of the fun things about doing restaurants, right? But really, you are working on your business plan, even though you haven't written a word. Right? The business plan is not this standalone document that you do when you're ready. It's a thing you're doing all the time. It just may not be on paper yet, or it may not be digital yet. It's all in here. So don't think of it as this like monumental task, like, oh my gosh, I have to write this thing. It's something you're working on all the time. Now, go ahead.
You know, and I think one of my challenges, and I know maybe we're getting too soon into the questions, but one of my challenge as somebody who has to end up writing, whether it's a vision or a business plan down, the way I process is with other people. I think better with people, if that makes sense. Like I love the feeling of masterminding versus just being kind of closed up in your own head thinking, is this a good idea? Like I want to get it out. I want to get feedback. And I think one of the things that's been holding me back as far as getting the start on my business plan is not having the group of people to share it with and to have it kind of unpack naturally. I mean, am I getting ahead of us? I don't want to do that.
You're providing the world's best segue. Nicely
Awesome.
done. Nicely done. Because that's one of your audiences, right? We think about the business plan. A lot of people think it's a document that you use to attract investors, right? That's the thing that you're going to present to, whether it's equity investors or if you're in a position where you can go to a bank and see if they're interested in providing you with lending. That's what the business plan is for. And yeah, but really you've got three major audiences, right?
Okay.
But we'll start with the finance side, and we're going to focus more on the finance side in the next two workshops that Eric mentioned earlier on. You've got your, what I'll call your advisors. So you talked about wanting to share it with other people and get their feedback. And that's incredibly important. A lot of people think the business plan has to be this perfectly formed thing before you show it to anybody else. No. I think the whole point is to get feedback as you're developing it. And dynamic. So your advice, dynamic, because people are going to read it and say, I'm not sure I understand this, or, can you explain this a little bit better? Or you're missing this big piece. That's really important to the writing process as well. And so your advising team, and again, they don't have to be existing restaurateurs, although that's incredibly helpful, right? They can be anybody, especially if there's someone who you think is your target customer. Having someone like that read your business plan who's not a restaurateur, who's not an entrepreneur, can actually be really helpful, because they might say, I don't get this concept, or I don't understand what you're trying to say with this. And if they're the ones that you're trying to reach and you can't communicate it well with the document, you got some work to do, but that's okay.
Yeah, you're making me think of the term a minimal viable product right now, where you just start. And it's not your final product, but by just starting as small as possible, as lean as possible, and just putting it out there, this is what we're doing, this is who we are, you get that feedback, and you're constantly slowly evolving over time and making those fine tweaks based off of what people are telling you, because you're sharing.
Absolutely. You may be making big tweaks. Let's be honest.
Yeah.
I mean, you may find that people give you feedback that tells you your concept is something that's not broadly appealing. I had a student once who had the best statement. I teach a course in restaurant development, and we do everything from, the business plan and site selection and figuring out the space and the whole 9 yards. It's great fun. And one of these students, at the start of the course, he said, you have to understand, we're not normal. If we're trying to start a restaurant, we are by definition not normal people, right? We have
outliers.
yeah, we're outliers. I mean, it's an incredibly difficult business. I'm not saying anything you don't already know, right? It's a hard business. It's an exciting business. It's a very dynamic business. And you've got to be a little crazy to do this work because it isn't 9 to 5, right? Incredibly all consuming. So we're not normal. And if the person who is your target customer, they have to understand where you're coming from, rather than if you are writing a business plan and saying, no, this is my idea and I'm sticking to it, even if my feedback isn't as positive as I'd like, you might be setting yourself up for some problems.
Yeah, and I don't want to get too far off subject, but one of the conversations that comes up a lot organically on the show is, do I do exactly what I want because I'm the person that has to show up to this thing every day, and should my business be an extension of who I am and what lights me up and what gets me excited? Or should I think with the end in mind, the market, and reverse engineer what they want? I think I'm torn sometimes. I think there's got to be a little bit of a balance. And I think it's when you get that overlay where you just happen to be lucky enough, the thing that you do is what the market wants. What are your thoughts on what I just shared?
Well, I think you hit on a really important thing, which is it has to be both, right? It has to be both. If you have something you're really excited about, yes, that keeps you motivated through all the difficulties of running these kinds of businesses, but it also has to resonate with the guest. But if you start with, an idea that comes out of market research and you think, well, I can make money with this, but I know my heart's really not in it, it's not going to be fulfilling for you. And if it's not fulfilling for you, it's not going to make money. Let's be honest.
Yeah.
So it's got to be that balance. And this is, again, where the business plan, we talk about the audiences, right? The bank or the lenders, your advisors, but the most important audience is you. This is your ongoing open thought process in a document or in a deck. It doesn't have to necessarily be a written document. A lot of people think it has to be this report that is all fancy and bound. And that's maybe why it's so intimidating to a lot of people. And sure, there are templates out there and there are lots of resources out there, but don't think of it as this monumental document. This is a document for you, or a tool for you to think through your concept and everything about it.
I like the analogy of thinking of it as your center line, or your operations manual or your business plan.
It's your guide rails.
Yeah, they're the center line. When you start to drift either direction, you can say, well, this isn't where we are, isn't where we said we're going to be or who we are. Let's recorrect, get back on that center line. Is that
Absolutely.
a good
That's a great analogy. I use the one of guide rails because the center line assumes that there is a center. When you first start planning, you may not have a center. You may be kind of like, I'm not sure. I know it's going to be fast casual, or I know it's going to be a place that really emphasizes family, or whatever your concept is, but you have wide guide rails. And as you learn more about your idea, as you go through the business planning process, those guide rails start to get a little closer together. They're never going to be completely like this because we have to change, right? The industry is very dynamic. People are dynamic. We're seeing this right now, right? Our needs to be very flexible about labor and protein costs. And so, your guide rails are going to get closer. But if you think of the business plan as figuring out where your guide rails are and what goes between them, and taking in feedback from as many different sources as you can, and this is just a way to communicate with those people. So that's kind of how I like to think about this tool. And I'm going to say tool rather than document because document sounds.
I like tool better.
Tool's better.
So who is your audience? Number one, finance, the banks. Number two, your advisors. And again, one sentence, who are the advisors? That's the market, right?
Well, it can be peers. So other restaurateurs, other entrepreneurs. It can be prospective guests. So, the market. And it can just be people who care about you. That's kind of a theme that I like to use is this idea of care, because that's what we do in our industry. People who care about you want to make sure that what you're doing is going to be in your best interest. So you want your spouse or your parent or your sibling or somebody who's close to you to read this document. but you also want it to be as many different people who you think will provide you with good feedback as possible. And I say good feedback, not positive feedback necessarily, just good feedback.
Yeah. And then lastly, which I think you could also extend that to your team, right? The people that show up every day to the business.
Yeah, once you have those people in place, business planning often is happening before you have a team. In fact, it should happen before you have a team, because how do you know what team you need until you have some sense of what this business is and how you're going to execute? And that kind of leads me to the next sort of main point I want to make, which is something we've talked about already, which is now that you know who your audiences are, right? And I'm going to say banks, but also investors, because when you're starting a restaurant business, any kind of food business, typically banks aren't going to be that interested in you. Ironically, right? Banks are only interested if you already have assets. So you might be looking at equity investors, right? And those, we call that F&F financing, right? Friends and family. But you've got those people, the advisors, and you start with, what do these people care about? Not how do I impress them, or, how do I make them understand me? It's what do they care about? There's that sort of joke about actors and who are working on their roles. And it's like, what's my motivation? Well, that's kind of what you have to do when you're thinking about putting together your business plan for these audiences. So let's start with the numbers people, right? What do they care about? And Eric, I'm going to ask you that question. I mean, the numbers people you talk to, what do you think they care about?
The numbers people, they want to make sure you're going to pay back the loan. Yeah. They want to make sure, or you have assets to cover the loan in case it fails.
Absolutely. So if it's a lender, they care about one thing, which is, am I going to get paid back? And to be honest, they don't necessarily want to take your assets. They want to get paid back. The last thing they want is a house, right?
Yeah. And so, I would say too, like your track record, your experience, like they're investing in you and your ability to actually execute what you say you need the money for. So they're going to see if you're a good pony to bet on, basically, I think.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's a corollary to the first point, right? Am I going to get paid back? And what are the things that feed into that? Thing number one is, does this person have a good track record or show that they have the resources to be able to do this, emotionally, from a skill standpoint, and they have a support network? Is it a good idea? Do they have the right numbers? All that kind of stuff. And again, we'll talk more about numbers in the next 2 workshops for those of you who are numbers geeks. But yeah, their main motivation is, am I going to get paid back? So when you're thinking about communicating with these people in your document or in your deck or whatever it is you're putting together for them, that's always going to be in the back of your mind, is you're building confidence with this document. So everything has to have a logic and everything has to be supported. It's almost like going to court, right? There has to be some logic that runs through it. So they're interested in the how much piece, how much money you're going to make, but they're also interested in something that I'm going to call the why. And that's going to be the theme for all the other audiences. The why is, why are you doing this? Because let's face it, there are easier ways to make money. There really are. And so you have to convince everyone who's looking at this document, including you, of the why behind it. We tend to focus a lot on the what and the how. So let's talk about the other 2 audiences. We'll talk about the advisor audience, and then you, as the person putting this thing together, you're the primary audience. We focus a lot on the what is this thing, right? What is the concept? What is the menu? What's the service model? What's the pricing? We also focus a lot about the how, what kind of team do I need, and how are they going to be integrated in to create this concept? We talk about how much we're going to produce in-house versus what we're going to outsource, or all of those sort of what and how questions. They, of course, need to be thought through, but the what and the how are really where you can get feedback. But the question you can't get feedback on, and the most important thing for you as the audience, is the why question. Why are you doing this? And why do you think you are the right person to do this? And so, Eric, what you just said about talking to lenders and sort of convincing them you're the right pony to bet on, that's really the why is Eric the right person to do this? Do you have a background with the cuisine that you're talking about? Did you grow up at your grandmother's knee making calzones? Or did you, you were in college and you ate calzones 24/7? I don't know what, but there has to be a why that is compelling, because you've got to sell yourself to that prospective lender or that prospective equity partner. And the why is also going to be the first part of your guide rails. Because if you have an idea of why you're doing something, every decision you can make, you can see, does that really fit with why I'm doing this? So this is going to be the case also for your advisors, right? Because they're going to focus on the hows and the whats, but the whys have to be compelling to them too, because they have to understand where you're coming from.
Well, that was going to be one of my follow-up questions, because I'm taking notes and I have what they care about is the topic we're talking about right now. And then we have banks, and I have equity investors and advisors on the same line, because they tend to be friends and family, right? And I put the why underneath equity investors and advisors, because in my experience, they're the ones that are they're not voting on so much, or they're not paying into what you're doing as much as who you are and why you're doing it, because it's more emotional when it becomes to the equity investors, I've found. But I guess what you're saying too is the banks do want to know the why as well.
Absolutely. Because as you pointed out beautifully earlier, they're betting on you. They are betting on you. And so they have to understand why you are the right person. And I can't stress enough the importance of you understanding why you're doing this, because that helps you through the tough stuff, right? There's going to be a lot of tough stuff, but it also helps you fine tune some of the whats and hows.
And I think it's important too to write this stuff down, because at some point we're going to hit this wall where it's going to be miserable, where we're going to want to quit. And I think to have your why written down, to have that clear, that clarity on why, you get to not say, oh man, I have to show up, I have to do this again, I have to do another day of this again. But that changes to I get to do this again. When you realize what your why is, and when you can kind of get at 30,000 feet again and see the big picture, it helps you kind of keep showing up.
Absolutely. When you're cleaning that grease trap, you need as much why as you possibly can, right? It's
exactly
the least fun job of them all. But this is why I talk about this as the business plan, because you can't come up with an idea without a why.
And I would like to think most of my listeners have listened to Simon Sinek's Start With Why by now. But if you have not, now's a great time to go get that book on audio. I'm telling you, like, that book explains to the T what Stephani is getting into right now. Sorry to interrupt if I did.
Oh, no, that's good. That's good. And I think the things that I see, I want to sort of segue to things that people do that kind of shoot themselves in the foot with their business plan, mistakes that I often see, obviously not thinking through the why. But I think the problem I see is people have a very deep love of their concept, and they can't articulate it clearly to somebody else. And you have a problem with your concept when either you have to say things like, well, the guest will just have to, or you will just have to, in order to understand something. That's a flaw in the concept's sort of phrasing. It doesn't mean your concept's bad. It just means you haven't got it clearly defined and communicated to somebody else. So having that sort of explaining what your concept is in a short, concise, and really easily understood way. But what a lot of the mistakes are doing it based on the food. I always start again with restaurants. Nobody has to go to a restaurant. And there's a lot of research on why people go to restaurants. And guess what? It's not about the food. Even though there's studies that say, oh, here's a questionnaire and we're going to rank all these different reasons why you go to restaurants. People say, oh, food's first. That's not actually true.
I had a really great debate with a bunch of chefs at a chefs collaborative summit in Boulder, Colorado on this subject. And I didn't win the conversation that day, but I'm leaning in your direction.
Well, the science backs you up, Eric. There are citations that I can send you, because when you ask people what they care about going to restaurants, they'll say food first. But when you actually watch people selecting a restaurant, we did a study where we got just groups of people in a room and we said, imagine, you don't know each other. You're going to go out to eat to get to know each other. Decide on a restaurant, go. And we just recorded what they said. And made, and you know what? Food was way down the list of how they chose a restaurant. And what's really important is how the restaurant is going to facilitate the experience they want to have. So I get to this point when we talk about business planning is you've got to start with what experience do you want your guests to have, which is what do your guests care about? And then how are you going to deliver on that? It's always with what does your guest care about? And then once you get sort of an understanding of what your guest cares about, the concept starts to come together and you can start expressing it in ways rather than saying, you know, we're a steakhouse that specializes in great California Cabernet Sauvignons. Okay, but I don't understand your why with that. It tells me you really like steak and cab, and a lot of people do. It's a great combination. But if you start with people need a place to do deals, or people need a place to celebrate. And when they celebrate, they push the boat out, right? They're going to not worry about their diet. They're not going to worry about their pocketbook. They're just going to do something great. And then everything else in the concept starts to connect to that if you start with what they care about.
So I'm curious, and I know you're really big into psychology, and I think you might be able to help me unpackage this a little bit. When I answer this question, like what makes people go out, like what's driving it, I always say it's psychographic. And I'm really like lighting up on the inside right now because I feel like you're reinforcing that sentiment that it's, and what I like to say, it's not what people, they're not going to your restaurant like for all the reasons you just listed. It's about what I like to say, it's about what people think of me when I go into your restaurant. Like how does eating at your restaurant reflect on what I think about myself and what I want others to think about me?
Oh my gosh, you've been reading the literature, Eric.
Well, I mean, like, and I think that it's very aligned with what you say with what your guests care about, because what people care about is what other people think about them.
You are spot on. Can I use an example that's not in the restaurant industry, but it's a really good illustration
Please.
of what you just said? I'm going to talk about Walmart versus Target.
Yeah.
Okay. Right? There are Walmart people and there are Target people. And I understand that in many markets, you don't have both, right? You'll just have Walmart. But in a market where there's Walmart and Target, people will very, very much self-identify with one or the other. And it's not like they look at the other and go, oh, you're horrible. You know, you're a Walmart, you're a Target. But you connect with one or the other because it says something about who you are. Right? The Walmart shopper might be focused on price specifically, and their idea is, you know, Walmart's going to give me the best price because they are massive and they have huge buying power, and I could get in there and get everything I need. And it's a very sort of what I'll call a functional approach. The Target shopper is what I'll call the hedonic. That's an academic word for pleasure seeking, but Target is really more about exploration and finding stuff. You can't go into Target and come out with just the things you went in for, right? They're brilliant at that. So, but back to your point about self-image is you start connecting with one of those brands and that's who you see yourself as. And that's who you will talk to other people who see themselves that same way. We do the same thing in restaurants, right?
Yeah. So it's not based off the food. It's about what people, it's not about the food. We rewrote, I'm trying to read my handwriting. I was trying to keep up with you. Facilitating of the experience, specifically what does the guests care about? We talked about it's about the people, or this is what I wrote down actually. Never mind. These are things I was just writing down, but keep going from there. Take it from there.
Yeah, no, what they care about for that particular meal experience. So let's say you've got a concept that is really more about grab and go. Mm-hmm. So the guest might care about things that aren't relevant to your particular dining experience that you're offering. So in the context of grab and go, what does the guest care about? Or in the context of a special dining occasion, what does the guest care about? So the business plan, back to sort of that way of thinking, is if you can start with that, what do they care about? That's the first part of your guide rails. And then what are some of the things I can do to deliver on that, to give them what they care about? And then what do I feel of all those options? Which are the ones that resonate with me? Because I need to be really excited about what this thing is I'm creating. Okay, so those guide rails start to come in a little bit more. And now you're at a point where you can start bringing advisors in. even though you don't have a menu, you don't have an idea of your revenues, you don't, none of that stuff is there yet. That's okay. You're bouncing the idea off as many people as possible and just getting their input.
Yeah. And I kind of want to point out, like, this is when you're saying it's really not about the food, it's really nothing to do with the food. Like, it's so outside of the world of food. It's like, what do my customers care about? Like, literally, like, what do they get out of bed and what worries them? You know, is it about being well? Is it about global warming? Is it about equal rights? Is it about any one of these, like, these causes? And that's why you're seeing a lot of, like, these brands that are coming up that are like mission driven brands that they do the food, but all the attention is on why they exist, the change they want to see in the world, so they can attract onto themselves the people who are like, that's me too, right? And I think that's what you're getting into, and I might have derailed you from that train of thought, but I think it was worth, like, really driving home. Like, don't even think about the food, think about, like, what you care about as a human and what other people can also associate with.
And then the food follows from that, right?
Yeah.
Everything follows from that. The food, the service model, the what the space looks like. One of the things that's been kind of fun about teaching this is often students will sign up for the course, and the very first day I'll go around the room and I'll say, oh, introduce yourself, tell me why you took the course. And a lot of them say, I have this idea. And I tell them to take their left hand and hold it out in front of them, and take their right hand and smack their left hand. Because you're not here to build this one idea. You're here to learn about the process. And your idea may be awesome, but the way you've just explained it to me, I don't have anything underneath it to understand the why. And I don't have anything underneath it to show me that this is something that actually is viable. And unfortunately, a lot of us start with, oh, I have this idea, I want to do an all meatloaf restaurant, and I love meatloaf, and everybody else loves meatloaf, and that's what I'm going to do. But if you start with, people need comfort, right? This is a time, especially right now, where people are going for comfort. And okay, what makes people comfortable in terms of food? What makes them comfortable in terms of environment? What makes them comfortable in terms of even the music that you play? And all that starts to come together. So to tie this back to business planning, you're doing this thinking kind of on paper or on a website or on a PowerPoint slide or whatever tool you like to use. You're putting all these ideas in place and you're kind of mushing them around. Now you go to audience number 2, which is your advisors, and just say, I'm kind of in this place. What do you think? And there's some wonderful exercises that we used to do in class where people extract ideas from images and all kinds of fun stuff. But really, you're just trying to get as much input as you possibly can to help you figure out where those guide rails are and start moving them closer and closer together.
Okay, so under the big mistakes that we see, we said people focus too much on the concept, they focus too much on the food. What are some of the other big mistakes that we haven't touched on?
Some of them are, and I have to look at my little notes here, I'm going to call it the field of dreams concept. I don't know how many out there listening are old enough to know the reference, the field of dreams.
If they build it, they will come.
Yeah, there's a lot of people who will just think, well, this is a great idea, and I'm going to build it, and people will just come. You need to support all your assertions in a business plan. And those don't necessarily need to be supported with research that you've done yourself. We talk about research as being either primary research, something that you go out and you collected the information yourself. You went around and talked to people. And by the way, surveys, terrible way to collect information. We could talk all day about why you don't want to survey prospective guests. But you might go out and look at the competition, let's say, and analyze what they're doing. That's primary research. You can also do a lot of secondary research. And for your market research, often that's going to be secondary. In other words, you're looking at information other people have gathered and you're interpreting it in the context of your business plan. So a lot of people make the mistake of not doing their due diligence, not doing enough research, whether it's primary or secondary, to support their assertions. They're just saying, I got this great idea. I've thought it all through. I can demonstrate it's going to make money. Hooray, let's go. And you got to have that support underneath it that shows you logic all the way along.
And I would encourage people. I think a lot of people, when it comes to getting that primary data, are afraid to talk to their competition. And You know what? You might get a handful of people that tell you to go pound sand or take a hike. Like, I'm not talking to you. But for every one of those people that you're not doing this for, or these are the reason that these are the people that are keeping you from doing it, there's going to be like 5 or 6 people that are willing to talk to you and share everything. And those are going to be your comrades, your colleagues going into the future. And if you can establish a relationship from day one with them, 2 or 3 of them might even become your mentors. So like, don't let being turned down or being told to go pound sand or take a hike stop you from talking to people in your market. What are your thoughts on that?
I think it's an excellent point. Restaurants are kind of a different animal from other kinds of business because competition actually is good for everyone. Think about cities you've been in where all the restaurants are in one neighborhood, like there's a restaurant row. There's a reason for that. And yes, there's a financial reason, a real estate reason, but there's also a real aggregation effect, a lot of value in being close to lots of other restaurants. So good restaurateurs welcome good competition and they want to make sure it's good competition. So they'll be helpful to you.
All ships rise with the tide, as Danny Meyer says in his book.
Absolutely. Saint Danny.
Yeah. So we got people fall in love with the food, they fall in love with their concept, they get this, we build it, they will come mentality. They don't do the research. In other words, what else are we missing?
The classic one is, oh, you just don't understand my idea.
Yeah. And do we finish unpackaging the if we build it, they will come elements, meaning doing the research? I don't want to cut you short there.
No, I mean, we could talk all day about that one, but it's a common pitfall because we fall in love with our concepts. We have to, right? Or else we won't execute because it's so hard to do these businesses. Rewarding, but hard. It's like raising children, right? Rewarding, you wouldn't trade it for anything, but oh my gosh, there are days, right?
Yeah.
But I think the Field of Dreams problem is related to this next one, which is, oh, they just don't understand my concept. Or I think if they got it, I'd be able to move ahead with this, but you're my roadblock. We get so caught up in the concept, it's hard to take in input from others, especially input that might tell us our guide rails are in the wrong spot.
The problem is not you, not me, it's you.
Yeah, exactly. It's not me, it's you. Trust me, it's always you, the person who's coming up with the concept, always you.
Yeah.
But there's another sort of side to that, and I'll sort of finish with this one, and then we can maybe flow the floor open to questions because I see the chat starting to pop up, which is great.
Yeah.
Is letting perfectionism get in the way. A lot of people want everything to be perfect, either before they show it to somebody or before they think they're ready to jump. You're never going to have a perfect business plan. You're never going to be 100% ready. Don't worry about waiting until you have a vision to start putting this together in some form of document or deck that you can show to people. Start it now and chip away at it. It's never going to be perfect. That's fine. It's a living document.
Your journey literally starts, what anybody can do. And I think Wes has been doing a great job this season. He's attending today is just share your story, share your journey from the time of this is what I want to do. Start putting it out there and create a website, create a social media account for for Facebook or Twitter and Instagram, and just start putting your vision out there, your journey out there, and then start collecting information, start collecting data. You can start doing this today for like the cost of putting a website together. That's the starting point. And then document the process of writing your business plan and getting that feedback. That's all this can be a part of the journey, especially today, because people aren't buying what you do, they buy why you do it. So if you can start sharing that why from day one and have a list of 1,000 people who are chomping at the bit for your opening day because you've established a relationship with them, that's the way you need to be thinking today. What are your thoughts as I say that?
I think you're absolutely right. You said the keyword relationship. Yeah. And I'm going to circle back to where we started this conversation, which is our business is about giving people something. We are giving people in the restaurant industry. That's we're built that way. And we always talk about wanting to have great regulars because we've built a relationship with them. So when you're writing a business plan, not only you're describing the relationships you're trying to create and why you're trying to create them, but you're using this as a tool to start those relationships going. And I think that's a nice way to kind of end the more sort of lecture-y part. I hope this hasn't been terribly dry.
This is I've loved today's conversation. Thank you for those who have sat through with us. I do have some bullets that we didn't touch on. I wanted to make sure you didn't miss those. Document versus deck. Did you want to get into that, or did you
Just
say
a little
something I
bit.
missed? Okay.
Again, when I say deck, I mean like a PowerPoint slide deck. Some people think, again, a business plan has to be this big fat report, and maybe writing isn't their thing. You know, either they don't like it or they're not good at it, or everybody can write, trust me. But some people prefer to be more visual, and that's fine. I've seen some really effective business plans that are done as a PowerPoint deck that are mostly visuals with a little bit of text, just enough. It has to stand as its own document. You can't have it as a PowerPoint deck or another tool, you know, whichever software package you like to use. But it has to be something you can give to someone, and you don't have to be standing there presenting it. It has to be something they can read on their own and understand. But if you are more visual, or you tend to not feel like you want to write a lot of text, you don't have to make a big report out of it. It can be another form.
Yeah, I think in this, concise is better than like a bunch of stuff. So if you can just communicate clearly, that's more effective than impressing people with a 60-page business plan.
Oh gosh, yes. Please don't do 60. But what you can do, what I tell a lot of my students is, you want a 2-page, what I'll call executive summary, which essentially is everything that's important in that document should fit in 2 pages. You know, what's the idea, who it's for, why you're doing it, who are you, and why do you think you're the right person? What's it going to make? What's it going to cost you to do? And Jeff, roughly in that order. You can move things around. And if I said that really fast and you're like, oh my gosh, I can't keep up, there are templates available that have really sort of good business plan outlines. Restaurantowner.com, which I know is an organization that you have an alliance with, Eric, right?
Yeah. So if you're in Restaurant Unstoppable Network, as soon as you sign up, we put you on a list that we share with restaurantowner.com. And if you're on that list, when you go to sign up and you use a promotional code, then you will get 6 months free access to restaurantowner.com, where that's where the template that you helped Restaurant Owner develop is, that lives over at restaurantowner.com.
There's actually several templates. We put together a template for a table service restaurant, for a quick service, you know, fast casual or QSR, and also one for what we're calling virtual kitchen or ghost kitchen. I know there's a distinction between those two, but if you have a specific business idea, there are templates for all of those. So they sort of give you an outline of the things that need to be in that document. But I was talking about the executive summary. That needs to be like 2 pages, so someone can read that. And then the rest of the document is just providing supporting evidence for what you said in those 2 pages. So if I'm looking through it and I want to know more about who your market is, I can go to that section and learn more, but I don't have to read the whole document to get it. That's the hardest thing to write. Write that last. The executive summary is last, but it really does force you to make sure you've got all the main points in that business plan before you trot in front of a bank or before you trot in front of an equity investor.
I love it.
So
we have covered a lot. I can't believe we're already 45 minutes into this. Do you want to open it up for Q&A, or are there any questions we need to be asking ourselves before we get into this? Like how do you want to transition to Q&A?
I would love to just see what people think, because I've seen the chat is starting to wake up. A few people are typing things. I can't really read and speak at the same time. I'm sort of old school that way. But I would love to know what people are thinking, or if you have questions or other directions.
No formal questions yet, just a lot of reinforcement. And I think actually now is a good time to take a break to thank our sponsors. We'll be right back to start fielding some of these questions. If we can just keep going. If you guys do have a question, feel free to throw your hand up, and that's how we'll prioritize, or you can just go ahead and start writing your question in the chat. Don't be shy, please. There's plenty of us here to get some good dialogue going.
And while you're thinking of those, I know we were talking a little bit about the research. I can tell you a little bit more about the sorts of things people care about when they're choosing a restaurant, if that helps give you some juice. They think about the experience they want to have. They want to allocate resources. I mean, that's sort of an economist's way of putting it, but you think about the resources that your customers have. They have time, money, energy. Those are the big ones. And so the choice of a restaurant is often a balancing those three. And you'll say, oh, people want to have a convenient, convenience is key. Well, what do you mean by convenience? Is it time or is it energy? Those are two different things. And with the amount of ordering that people are doing now, they're saving energy. They're not really saving that much time, depending on what the concept is that they're ordering from. They're probably not saving money, because it might cost you more to order food in than to go into the restaurant and get it yourself. But it's that saving energy. So if you think about that resource balance, that's another thing that guests care about, right? Is what do they have? Where I live in a college town. I live in Ithaca, New York. And most of the year, most guests are students. And this is an Ivy League institution at Cornell. So these students, most of them, I'll be honest, they have quite a bit of money. So money is usually not the concern for them. It's usually time and energy. So they care about that a lot, right?
So you're getting back into the whys right now, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I see one of the questions that just popped up was about the whys. That was you?
Yeah. So I'm curious, you being somebody who's so plugged into the industry, and you're seeing trends of people developing their why, like what are the big whys that are getting a lot of traction right now?
You mean on the parts of people creating restaurant concepts or on guests?
I guess like people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. So like what is there a trend in the whys, the missions behind the restaurant that seem to be getting a lot of traction?
Absolutely. And I'm going to distill it to one word: community. People want to feel like they are connected to you as a restaurant concept or to you as any other kind of business. They want to feel a relationship. They want to build a community. Part of that is social media has facilitated this. I'm going to use an example. I'm on Twitter. I don't know how many of you are on Twitter. And one of the favorite Twitter accounts I follow is for Steakum. Now, I would never eat Steakum. You know what I mean by Steakum? It's a product. It's a frozen beef product. They're thinly sliced pieces of frozen beef for making a pseudo Philly cheesesteak. If anybody listening is a Philly person, they'll go like, "Oh my God!"
Is that the one that comes in like the little like plastic that has a wax paper and you just like already put into like servings for you?
I don't even know, because I've never bought it. I know. I mean, if someone's listening and they're a steak up person, I apologize. But you have the best Twitter account ever, because even though I don't buy your product, here I am talking about it with a whole bunch of restaurant professionals. So it tells you I've already sort of bought into this community because they've used their Twitter feed to talk about things that have nothing to do with frozen beef, nothing to do with food, but that make people connect with that brand and associate certain things with that brand. So they've built this online community about being a good citizen. That's what they write about, being a good citizen and what that means. And, suddenly you've got people saying, well, that's what this brand stands for. And I'm all in because I want to be a good citizen. And so you asked about, trends. That's one form of community, is making people feel like they connect about something bigger than what you're serving.
Yeah. And I'll see a lot of people that will take that element of community, something about a change they want to see in their community or in the world, whether that be equal rights or that be a wage disparity or whatever it might be. Like there's something that they want to see, a change they want to see in the world, and they make that change at the leading edge. And I think that people, is that what you say by community too, or is it more just connecting people and being an excuse for people to get together?
I think more the former than the latter, but maybe it's somewhere in between, which is humans, we are herd animals, right? We do not function well as individuals. That's why this last year and a half has been so hard for so many people, is it's kind of been isolating, and why we as restaurateurs, we have a really important role to play to create that place you can gather with other humans again. Hooray. But I think people need to feel connected to other people that may or may not be family members of theirs. That's just deep in our DNA. And so what the community piece doesn't have to be sort of what restaurants have normally done, is said things like, oh, we engage the community by participating in the local festivals or sponsoring a little league team or whatever. That's one way of doing it, but it's deeper than that. It's more about that psychological. You talked about psychographics earlier. For those who are unfamiliar with the term psychographics, it just means people who think alike. So when we talk about developing a business plan, we often talk about demographics, right? Age, gender, family size,
Wealth.
where people live. Yeah, facts about people. That's demographics. Psychographics is how people think and people that think alike. So I use the example of Target and Walmart, right? So they're Target people and Walmart people, and maybe immediately you started sort of getting a vision in your mind of what those people think. That's what I mean by psychographics. And does that connect with what you think of it, Eric? Because you used the term first.
Yeah.
So back to the community, people want to have a psychographic party or a group to connect to. And so if you can understand who your prospective customer is, figure out what they care about, what is the psychographic profile that is going to work well with your own position in the world. You can't create a concept that is communicating something that you don't believe. Or you don't stand for. So
in my mind, this could be hobbies. This is going to be something this is where when you inject yourself into your business, your passions, your interests, your hobbies, you can use that to find other people that have the same psychographic or the same interests as you. Even if you're just injecting your values into the business, the other people are going to say, me too. And so you're literally connecting people. You're providing the space and the literal relationships that not just with you and your guests, but with your guest in each other, connecting your guests together because they share the same values, the same psychographics as you, and the same hobbies as you.
Yeah, I think the values word there is the key one. I really do, because and those values, many of the values that make us restaurateurs are universal. Doing good to other people.
So since I don't see any hands going up, I'm going to get super selfish and ask you all the questions I have for me and what I'm trying to do here. How's that sound?
Okay. Although Brandon now has one. He's just popped in a question for us.
That's fine. That's fine. Thank you, Brandon. Do you want to ask your question or do you want me to ask it? You can just point at me if you want me to ask it. He's going to have me ask it. Do you suggest goals in a business plan?
I mean, goals actually written out in the business plan, or having goals as you think about writing it? Goals written out in the business plan specifically?
Feel free to unmute.
Goals written out in the business plan, specifically short-term and long-term, and with time frames.
Absolutely. Write them last. It may sound crazy. Everyone says, start with your goals. And then, from the goals, and you might think of goals as your guide rails, but actually documenting them. Absolutely. I think it's a good thing to include. The time frame thing is a bit fraught because I have never worked on a restaurant project, and I've worked on several, that everything went according to the time plan, right? Yeah. It could be that you didn't get permit on time, or you open up a wall and you discover that there's nothing holding that wall up, and now you got to do a whole bunch of additional construction, whatever it is. So I may not stay, the time frame I wouldn't necessarily lock onto. But you might say our initial goal is to, open this restaurant and get it stabilized by stabilized, I mean that it's making money at a consistent level by year 3, which is not unrealistic. I think a lot of people think we get in the restaurant business and the money's just pouring on all of our heads. And nope. I see you smiling. Like, nope, that's not how it happens. But I think you can say, look, I have a goal of opening 1 unit, getting it stabilized. And the goal is to get to 3 units in this market by year 7 or whatever it is. Sure. But if you're going to use goals, write them last when you've got all the supporting evidence to show that those goals are realistic. Because if you put a goal in that document that someone reading it's like, yeah, that's field of dreams. You're not doing yourself a service.
When I think of goals, I think that goes in your vision. That's a place to write down, what is your goal? What does it look like? How does it make you feel? What are people saying about all that stuff? That feels like vision stuff, right? 1-year goal, 5-year goal. No,
this is where you start sort of wrestling with what these different words mean, right? Vision, goal, objective, and academics will spend hours arguing what's a goal, what's an objective. I think you've got sort of 3 buckets for, why are you doing this? Those are goals to some extent. Yeah. What do you hope to achieve? Those are goals and objectives. And how are you going to get there? There are some sort of buried goals and objectives in there. So I'm a little sort of not too worried about which term you use, but I think what Brandon's question was more about very concrete, specific, measurable outcomes. should you put those in a business plan? And I'm going to say yes, with a caveat, and do it last once you've done all the other work. Whereas what you're saying, Eric, what I think, I'm putting words in your mouth, but you're talking about starting with a vision that sort of, why are you doing this and what do you hope to get out of it? That's a good place to begin so that you start to define those guide rails. That's another way of thinking about the word goal. So
Yeah.
you can,
and it does get super foggy. It does get super foggy when it comes to the like mission, purpose, you know, like all like that stuff. Like it gets a little like, what's,
you know, you can fight about what those terms mean. And I think people get kind of hung up on them, like, oh my God, I don't know what my purpose is. You know, I can't move forward. Of course you can move forward. You know, figure it, write down something, and you can always come back. You'll help sort of craft your purpose and your vision and your mission, and however you want to frame it, as you think through details. So this is an iterative process. I think that's where I want to end on, although I see Wes has a question, and I'll get to your question just a sec.
Yes.
This is an iterative process. And so it's not like I have to have it all worked out and write it in a linear way. You're constantly adding and subtracting and changing, and that's what it's for. So don't beat yourself up if you don't think you have a purpose or a vision or a mission or a goal, or it'll come.
Yeah. Wes, you're ready to rock and roll. We're ready for you.
All right. So I have a tendency to sort of go overboard and, and then I end up getting lost as I sort of take on too much. So what information would you consider to be excessive, doesn't need to be included, or should be avoided for sort of brevity purposes and otherwise? Cut out the weak stuff.
Great question. It's like pruning an apple tree. I like the analogy of buckets. So when you're writing, have in your mind sort of three buckets. You have the absolutely crucial, like this is, if you had 2 seconds, or excuse me, let me rephrase that. If you had 20 seconds in an elevator with an investor, what would be the things you would say? Those are in the crucial bucket, right? Then you got the bucket on the other end, which is the details. All go in the bucket. You know, it's details of menu, or details of how you're going to execute, or details of packaging, or details, you know, whatever it is. It doesn't mean that information's bad. You should have it because you have thought, means you're thinking through, and it helps you a lot with what we're going to talk about in the next 2 workshops, which is your projected revenues and projected performance and your capital budget. So there's no bad information, but the bucket that has all that detail, you may not want to put anything in that bucket in your initial business plan. And then the bucket in the middle is what you're not sure about. Either it's, excuse me, it's either things that you can maybe move into the more important, or maybe they move into the detail bucket, but if you're not sure. So I would write my document that way. As I'm writing whatever it is that comes to mind, go ahead and write it down. Don't worry about editing yourself. But as you go through, you might say, I'm going to cut and paste this paragraph and put it in the detail bucket. Academics refer to this as the appendices, right? If you look at an academic book, there's really only about 100 pages of value. And then there's like 200 pages of all the supporting stuff that no one ever reads. But you need to have done that work to provide the support for the part that people do read. So I wouldn't edit yourself too much, but keep that content in a bucket where you can pull it out as needed. But it's okay to go down a rabbit hole as you're thinking this stuff through. It'll help you with the numbers.
All right, Wes, did you put your hand back up, or did you just not lower, or did I not lower it? I can't remember.
I just didn't lower.
Okay, there you go. Do you have a follow-up question?
I might here in a second, but if somebody else has one, they can jump in.
All right. I don't see any questions rolling through. I mean, back to the thought process I was going on with what I'm doing right now with Restaurant Unstoppable. My business plan isn't so much like what happens when you have a business plan that's a bunch of businesses that all kind of like vertically integrate. When do you start that process of, is it a separate business plan to vertically integrate all of your businesses, or do you treat that like one business where like each section is its own business? Do you know what I'm saying?
I do. And I'm going to go back to my original point, which is who's your audience and what do they care about? Who are you asking for what? So let's say you're talking about this integrated business, right? And I think where you're going is you've got, Restaurant Unstoppable, the podcast, and you've got the network, and then you've got this business you want to start that kind of feeds into and provides a platform for. So if you're talking to an advisor about an integrated media business, of course you want to have all that information tied together. If you're talking to an advisor about specifically your restaurant operation, that sort of needs to be its own little standalone.
But I feel like when it comes to like the restaurant, what makes why me, right? If I'm selling myself to a bank, why me? Well, because I have this podcast and this massive network of people who are going to coach me along the way. And we're going to document that whole process, and we're going to teach the world. Our why is to transform the restaurant industry by encouraging people to open up and to share and to come together and unite around this mentality that there's a better way to do things. Right. So for me, where so much of my why is incorporated with the bigger picture, is that just like a cliff note?
No, that's where you begin. You say, my vision is I want to help and change the restaurant industry. And I'm going to do that a bunch of different ways. Let me talk to you about those different ways and how they integrate and how they are going to make money. Because if you're talking about to the bank, right?
Yeah.
How are they going to make money? So no, you need, for what you're talking about, I would definitely want to stitch them together in one, because that's the overarching why, is I'm doing this because I really see an opportunity to make a difference in one of the largest industries in the country that employs one of the highest number of people, we will again, and makes a difference in everybody's life every day, right? People eat out all the time. So I think you've got a sort of an overarching vision, and then these pieces plug into it. And then you're explaining how that's going to make money if you're talking to a bank.
Got it.
If you're looking for just feedback about the restaurant piece of it, you might have to just peel that piece off, because let's face it, if we're building a restaurant, no matter what its main purpose is, it has to make money. We don't do this for fun. I mean, we do it for fun because it's the best industry in the world, but it still needs to be a viable business. And so you need to make sure that you've got a business that can stand on its own. Each individual unit can stand on its own. By that, I mean, you don't have to have 10 units to be profitable, that each of those units can generate profit on its own. Otherwise, you do not have a viable business. That it might be a sort of a spin-off or a separate document that you use for different purposes.
Got it.
But your business isn't really a restaurant that you're talking about. Your business is Restaurant Unstoppable. And you've got all these different components. And as you think it through more and get more feedback, you might start thinking of additional components. Maybe it's a book, maybe it's a tour, maybe it's, I don't know.
And I think that's how restaurateurs need to start thinking, though, that their business, their restaurant is just a component of what they're trying to do. What are your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. Everything we do is a component. The hands are going up everywhere now.
Yeah.
Which is great. Everything we do in our life is supposed to be enhancing us in some way, shape, or form.
I think Wes is chomping at the base. My turn.
Yeah, jump right in, Wes. What you got?
I realized that I lowered my hand and put it back up, so I didn't know if it just looked like it was sitting there up. But so I'm working on a SBA application for a potential business. The specific model is a board game cafe. So we have full service menu. We have cocktails with a liquor license, cafe equipment, and then library of board games people can take back to the tables, etc. So we've formed our sort of corporate structure where we have an operating company and a real estate company. And I have two different things that I need to do as far as SBA applications go. One is trying to apply for a loan for the buildings themselves so we can get an SBA commercial mortgage. And then two is some startup expenses to cover for that. So my target audience is the SBA. And I have two different applications essentially that I need to make, or one sort of combined application with two separate business plans is what I'm intending to structure that as. Am I on the right path, and any advice or tips?
Oh gosh. Yes. Well, the first thing, to do an SBA loan, you have to be rejected by a bank first, right? That's how it works. Is you go to a bank and you say, I'd like money. And the bank goes, no, we don't know who you are, but there's this SBA loan. So think of your audience in this case is not the SBA. For those listening who may not, that's the Small Business Administration. And this is a loan program that provides funding to small businesses for physical. They won't give you working capital. They won't give you, but they will help with physical, in other words, assumable assets. But you first have to get denied by a bank. So you need to probably start your conversation or your business planning by figuring out what your local bank cares about, who funds restaurants in your market. I see you wearing a Tennessee Titans shirt. So are you in Tennessee?
No, I relocated to Illinois. So
Okay.
Bringing on my Tennessee background.
Okay. So you want to start with that, but I think I would maybe not go down too far in the how you want to structure the real estate company, the operating company. That's a later discussion to have. I think the first discussion you need to have is, how is a board game cafe going to be profitable and scalable? And it can be, absolutely. The challenge you have is length of stay, because people stay a long time playing board games, which is great. And you just got to keep the average check growing. So you need to make that case first. And when you go to a bank, demonstrate that with a single unit, you can be profitable. And then you can start, when you start growing, having the real estate company. And it sounds like you're building a building from scratch. Is that what I heard you say?
No. So there's a 1950s bowling alley that's been converted into a wedding venue with sort of some of the lanes converted into like a bar top and tabletops, et cetera, that we're looking to purchase because we do want to do some remodeling, including like there's no windows, there's, so some sort of extensive building remodel. And we have gone to the bank, and the bank has essentially said, especially with COVID, that one, they would fund us, but two, that they recommend that we make an SBA loan application through an affiliate that they have, because terms are currently favorable.
This could be something we could talk about offline and have like an office hours to go into the details. But your main question is, how much detail do you want to provide to the bank? Enough that they can understand how you're going to make money and to support that with evidence. And there isn't a one answer to anyone's particular business model. I think you just, again, think who's reading this and what do they care about? And when it comes to lenders, Eric said it beautifully, are they going to get paid back? Equity versus SBA, that is the question. SBA is less expensive, right? Debt is always less expensive than equity, but it's harder to get.
I would love to do an SBA Loan 101 workshop. I don't know if anybody can make any recommendations as to who that person would be, if you want to think about that, but that is definitely on my radar. If we don't have any more questions, I think we can think about wrapping it up. We're almost at an hour and 10 minutes. Thank you so much, Stephani. You were great. We do, and I didn't give you a warning here, but I know you have a massive network and you know a lot of great people. We usually wrap up every episode by calling somebody out, and that's usually ideally how I find my future guests for the show. So who do you respect and admire in the restaurant industry? Somebody that you think would make a great guest, somebody you would listen to, you would tune into that episode if you knew that I was getting them on the show.
Oh my gosh. I can think of tons and tons of people who are doing interesting things. This may sound really out of left field because they're not in the restaurant industry.
That's fine.
But I think there's a lot to learn from people outside. And I'd have to actually get their name because I don't know this person.
Okay. Well,
there is a hotel concept that I think is brilliant, and they are leveraging technology and modular design with an incredible understanding of who their customer is and what they care about, and they're executing beautifully. And it's a company called Citizen M.
Citizen M. Where are they based?
Citizen M. It's a hotel company. They're based in Europe. They're based in the Netherlands. But they
Jared, pack your bags, man. We're going on a trip.
But they have them in here in the United States, and they have them in all kinds of places. But the reason I say that is because they are what I think is the perfect marriage of understanding their guest incredibly well and doing amazing execution, and they're creative thinkers. So if you get a chance to go to their website, Citizen M, I have no investment in them. They are a privately held company. Believe me, if they were public, I would be throwing money at these people. But there's a lot to learn from what they're doing. So if you can track down somebody at Citizen M to talk to about how they marry understanding the guest and creating an amazing business model, that's who I would talk to.
Beautiful. Stephani Robson, thank you so much for joining us for part 1 of this 3-part series. And if you guys enjoyed today's recording and you want to be a part of future conversations, make sure you head over to restaurantunstoppablenetwork.com, create a profile, be a part of the conversation. And how can we connect with you, Stephani, if we listen to this today and we want to maybe follow up with an email or a question? What's the best way to connect?
Believe it or not, email is the best. And my email address is pretty easy. It's S as in Stephani, KR4, the number 4. So SKR4 at cornell.edu. So Cornell is CORNELL.edu. And now I'm expecting my inbox to go boom with, but that's okay.
I will say that Stephani is also in the network now. She created her own profile. So that's another way to connect. And maybe, I don't know, I would love to host you in West on packaging that during a coffee with Eric if you want to get back in the
Sure. So we'll figure out a coffee hour. We can do that. Be happy to.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Stephani. Thank you to everybody who showed up. There is no questioning. You are unstoppable.